Can I also acknowledge in Siobhan Brown's speech that she used for the first time a very important word that hadn't appeared, I think, in any previous speech, which must be acknowledged, and that is Ukraine. And in this week of all weeks, it is absolutely fundamental that we unitedly acknowledge the impact that Vladimir Putin's aggression in Ukraine is costing not just the people of Ukraine, obviously, in the first instance, but the entirety of Europe and the entirety of the world economy is impacted by what is happening in Ukraine in terms of energy and food security. And that is the backdrop to this budget and to the UK's budget as well. Having said that, I do agree also with something that I heard earlier, which is that budgets do show political priority. And I'd have to say that this budget, whatever it does, shows that the SNP's political priority is not education and skills. It's not about our young people. And take, for example, higher education. This budget represents a real-term cut in funding of 0.7% for our universities. It includes a 2.7% cut in capital investment, and we are in real danger of Scotland's universities falling further behind the rest of the United Kingdom and more dependent on revenue from international students' fees in an increasingly volatile global market. And there has been a 84% increase in the number of Scottish students being refused entry to Scottish universities since the year 2006. And this can't be right. Educating young Scots is not the priority for this government, and it ought to be.
Deputy First Minister.
I wonder if Mr Kerr would care to complete the picture by recognising that there are a record number of young people from Scotland going to university and a record number of young people from deprived backgrounds going to university as well.
Stephen Kerr. Welcome the fact that we are catching up with the rest of the United Kingdom in relation to accessibility to university from people who come from disadvantaged and difficult backgrounds. The reality is, in tertiary education, the lack of parity that the SNP sees between universities and colleges is writ large in terms of the differential payments they pay for students. Colleges will be forced to make 25% redundancies this year.
Bob Doris.
Very well know, and I'm sure wish to confirm to Parliament, that we've both raised the issue of the disparity in funding between colleges and universities at the Education Committee, but we also know that the Scottish Funding Council are doing due diligence work to hopefully address that aspect and bring forward real-life data to hopefully address that funding gap going forward. Is that something you would support?
Stephen Kerr.
I can support the fact that we need to remove the disparity of esteem there is in terms of the choices that young people face, that the road to university should no longer be paved with gold when the other pathways that are available to young people are not available to them with the same degree of commitment and support. And I repeat again, colleges will be forced to make redundancies, and SNP and Green members should be ashamed. The Chamber will also well know that universities receive £7,500 per student, which college students only attract £5,000. Those are the numbers behind. Such is the disparity of esteem. On apprenticeships, the Scottish Training Federation has pointed out repeatedly that the Scottish Government has frozen places. Perhaps someone on the government benches would like to tell me that they are wrong.
Jimmy Hepburn.
I'm happy to. If you don't have the figures in front of me right now, Presiding Officer, but what I can say is the latest set of figures show an uplift and an increase in number of starts at Q3 compared to Q2. Mr Kerr told me there was a freeze. It seems to be apprentices are still being recruited this year.
The Scottish Training Federation is now being accused by the Minister of not knowing what they're talking about, because they say there is a freeze. They say that training organisations will be forced out of business completely. This SNP, the Deputy First Minister has lost the head.
Could I please ask for a bit
He's lost the head.
Please resume your seat. Could I have less sedentary hurling of abuse, I think, as the previous PO in the Chair described it? Mr Kerr, please resume.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The SNP clearly does not see further higher or technical education as a priority. It ought to be. Governments commit resources based on their priorities. I will give way. I'm conscious of the fact I may be running out of time, though.
A wee bit extra time will be given back, Mr Kerr.
Right.
Monica Lennon.
I'm very grateful to the member for giving way. I think some very important points have been made about the future of apprenticeships, and I know that the Minister pays a lot of attention to the cross-party group in construction, but there were very serious concerns raised just the week before recess about the future of plumbers, electricians, other trade, decorating and so on, and concerns were raised that some of those apprenticeships might end and people might not get jobs. So these are important points. Perhaps the Minister who's listening would engage with the group urgently, because there are genuine concerns out there.
Mr Kerr.
Glad to facilitate Monica Lennon making a plea to the Minister. By the way, I endorse what Monica Lennon has said. Combined with the cuts in colleges and the cuts in skills development in Scotland, this is not the direction that we should be travelling in this country at the minute, given the economic backdrop that we are all dealing with. And whatever John Swinney says, usually at length and at the top of his voice, as witnessed earlier, especially when he's speaking to me, this SNP government does not prioritise the future of our young people. Yeah. They don't put their money where their mouth is, and, presiding officer, it looks like it will be no fun growing up in SNP Scotland over the next few years, because we know there is a real shortfall in council spending and that young people will bear the brunt of these cuts in their communities. If anyone on the government benches is going to stand up and tell me that this local government settlement is good and generous and will help make their communities the best places for our children to grow up in, I'm delighted to hear from them. And the Deputy First Minister on cue stands.
Briefly, Deputy First Minister.
I'm very grateful for the opportunity to say to Mr Kerr and to the Chamber that a local government settlement that gives local governments £793 million more than they were expecting is undoubtedly a very good deal for local government in the financial chaos inflicted on us by the Conservative government.
Yeah. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear. It's the same old broken record. So, Deputy First Minister, where are the additional 3,500 teachers? Additional 3,500 teachers promised in the SNP manifesto. There are actually fewer teachers this year than there were last year. Where's the additional 3,500? Even with the threats of sanctions looming over local councils, the fact is the actual number of teachers is falling. And as we heard yesterday from the University of Stirling, subject choice is narrowing, impacting negatively on the life chances of our young people. Councils have been forced to make other cuts because of the threats that have been issued by Shirley-Ann Somerville. And what's the impact of this? If I may indulge the Chair for one moment longer. Falkirk Council's SNP administration have proposed cuts to school transport that will affect 600 children who have to walk busy roads for miles and miles without transport. And this is the same SNP administration that is closing 4 swimming pools. Meanwhile, councils of all political persuasions and sizes are looking at a host of savings and cuts that will impact on young people.
Mr Kerr, could I please ask you to conclude?
I will conclude.
Pretty generous.
Cuts to, I appreciate that, cuts to youth services, summer play opportunities, swimming lessons, cheaper ways of making school meals, cuts to social interventions. Scotland, thanks to the SNP cuts to local authorities, become a land of rusting play equipment, closed community centres and cancelled futures, and it isn't good enough.